This episode of the Children's Literature Podcast is brought to you by a big hug. A big hug. Whether you're saying hello or goodbye, make sure not to skip one when it's important. Welcome to the Children's Literature Podcast. I'm your host, TQ Townsend. This episode is an interview with Angela Pham Krans. Recently, co-host Chloe and I sat down for a wonderful conversation with Angela Pham Krans, the author of Finding Papa. I absolutely love this book. My kids love it, and everyone I've shared it with loves it. More than once, it's made me misty-eyed, and it's quickly come to occupy a place of honor on my family's bookshelf. I'm clearly not the only one who feels this way, because Finding Papa has quickly racked up plenty of praise from prominent librarians across the United States. Just last week, the American Library Association placed Finding Papa on its 2024 Notable Children's Book list. This year, as a theme for the show, I'm emphasizing historical fiction written for children, and Finding Papa is one of the most outstanding books I could possibly feature on the show. It's beautifully illustrated by T. Bui and tells the story of a family that flees from Vietnam in the years following the end of the Vietnam War. They joined the thousands who were known as the Boat People. Angela herself is one of the Boat People. She made a perilous journey as a toddler and has made a wonderful life for herself in the United States. After editing this episode, I spent a long time thinking about the courage of Angela's parents, who went on a dangerous and uncertain journey to ensure that their family could have a better life. That kind of resilience is inspiring, and it encouraged me to do everything I can to be a better parent. I'm so glad that Angela's family made it to the United States, because they're exactly the kind of people that I'm proud to have as fellow Americans. Angela has recently published another book, Words Between Us, which is a sweet story about how an American kid who mostly speaks English learns to bond with a Vietnamese grandmother who mostly speaks Vietnamese. It's a really charming story, and one that realistically reflects the experiences of many children today. Angela Pham Krans is not just a talented writer, but a really lovely person with a positive point of view, thoughtful perspectives on family relationships, and, as you're about to hear, a fantastic laugh. Please enjoy the conversation that Chloe and I had with Angela. Today, my guest on the show is Angela Pham Krans, author of Finding Papa, an illustrated book that movingly tells the story of a little girl from Vietnam whose father has to go ahead of his wife and daughter in search of a new life in the United States. Angela, thanks so much for being a guest today for me and Chloe on the show.
Yes, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
So let's start by having you tell me what you remember about your early childhood. Do you remember anything about your life before you came to the U.S.? And I know Chloe specifically had a question from something she saw in the book.
Did you actually have a pet chicken?
No pet chicken. So that is fictional. That part, while the story is based on true events, there are parts of the story that are made up, and the chicken and the mango tree are made up. However, in my adult life, we do have a chicken farm in North Georgia, which is where I live. So we have lots of chickens on the farm, but I didn't have a chicken when I was younger. Great question.
Do you remember anything at all, though, about your very early childhood, or was it just too long ago?
It was too long ago. I don't remember anything before the trip to the U.S. I do remember probably around like 4 to 5 years old is when I think I started retaining information. But prior to our boat trip, I don't remember anything. And so as part of writing Finding Papa, I interviewed my parents extensively and, had all the questions I wanted to ask them. And they kind of gave me a play-by-play of what happened. And so I used that to help frame up the story for Finding Papa.
Who were the boat people and why were you one of them?
So boat people is generally referred to a group of folks during probably the late 70s or mid 70s to the 80s, I think probably mid 80s, who left the country, who left Vietnam, just seeking a better life after the Vietnam War for various reasons, new life, the political climate. They left, and there were so many people who left, like hundreds of thousands who left on a fishing boat because they didn't have big ships or nice boats. They were typically old rickety boats, and people would pile on into these boats and cram on and hope that when they left the country, they would find land somewhere where they could start a new life. It was a very dangerous trip for a lot of people. And, it's sad, unfortunately, for many, they didn't make it to their destination.
So Chloe, it's funny. I knew some boat people growing up. So I grew up in Los Angeles, and there was, Vietnamese populations kind of sprinkled around town. And there were a few local businesses that were owned by people who had come from Vietnam. And I was really, really little. So, you just kind of accept whatever's around you, and you don't know anything about history or politics.
Right.
So I remember one day we went into one of the businesses, and on the way home, my mom said, the woman who owns that shop is very brave. She's one of the boat people. And I was probably like 6 when she told me this. And I was like, oh, she has a boat. That's cool.
Glamorous.
So I thought it meant she owned a boat.
Yeah.
So next time we went in, I said, "Where's your boat?" And she just laughed and patted me on the head. She was so sweet about it, because like, what do I know? I'm just a kid. But yeah. And then later, she helped explain it to me. I was like, oh, okay. That's not what I thought. That's an amazing story. But,
that's cute. That's cute of you. Yes. So it's just, I think, a general term. And to be honest, I didn't know we were called the boat people. It was part of the learning process for me when I was writing Finding Papa, because I wanted to be, while it's a fictional story, I wanted to be as accurate as I could. So I did a lot of research, like the boat that saved us, the ship that saved my parents, what people went through during that time. I read about other people's stories that I could find online. So just to really help create that background and environment atmosphere as I was writing the story, I just wanted to make sure I was hearing other people's story. And, you'll see pictures on the internet where it's just lots of boats and boats being saved by large ships. And the boats are usually filled to the brim with people, not meant to hold that many people. So it was, I think, a hopeful time when you say the boat people, because people were finding a new home. But I think it was also, so it's hopeful, but also dangerous and scary and sad.
Yeah. So the boats themselves, these were not boats designed to go out on the open sea or to carry that many people. So even just the journey itself was dangerous. But were there any other things that made it dangerous just trying to get on the boat in the first place?
Yeah. So typically it's a pretty secretive process. And I can speak from my parents' point of view. It's they had to find money to pay a guide, and they had to put all their trust that this guide knows what he or she was doing to guide us from the river into the ocean and hopefully somewhere safe. So yes, dangers of getting on the boat. So organizing this trip to be able to get on the boat, getting there at the assigned time or agreed upon time, and just making it out into the open ocean. And because you have to face starvation, storms. There wasn't technology on the boat like we have today, right? People are relying on a compass and their directional know-how. And so getting lost. Also at the time, I think there were a lot of pirates on the ocean who knew that people were leaving. And so they used that as an opportunity to attack these folks. So it was a scary time. I think people understood the risk and all that could happen and that they may not make it. But I think they balanced it against their current life. And I think they just made a decision. Like for my parents, they made a decision that it was risky, but perhaps also hopeful that they could find a new life. So I guess that gave them enough courage to make this trip, despite knowing the dangers that were awaiting them in the ocean.
The word courage was what came into my mind too the whole time you're telling that story, because in order to just literally throw yourself in the ocean and hope for the best, like what wild courage would that take?
Yeah.
Like
So
nobody,
crazy.
I don't know if I could do it. I don't
No.
know. But I guess you
My
never know
mom,
until you're in that position, right?
exactly. Exactly. I think, fighting for your family, fighting to be together again, I guess you find the courage to do that. But, my mom took the trip when she was 24 years old. At 24, I had graduated from college, living with a roommate. My dinner was microwave hot dogs, like so not in the same realm of what my mom did at that age. I was, coming home from my first job and watching TV and just doing all these things. And I just can't even imagine at 24 doing that. So it's a lot of courage.
Yeah.
So
Now, Chloe, when I read the book to you, and we've got our copy right here. When I read the book to you, now you're 9 years old, your little sister is 3. You both caught on to different things. So like when you asked questions about the book, what were you thinking about? And then when Phoebe was asking questions about the book, what was she wanting to know more about?
Phoebe was just like, this girl's lost her papa. She needs her papa. And like,
Yeah.
I was like, what are their pronunciations? And like, what is the story about?
Yeah, you wanted to know, like, what part of the world is this happening? When is this? When did this? So she was asking questions about the history and the geography, which is kind of more of a 9-year-old point of view. But yeah, my little toddler, we've read this over and over. And every time she gets so anxious when the little girl's papa goes away, and she's so relieved when they hug at the end. And so when parents and teachers are reading this book or teaching this, how would you recommend that maybe they give more of a historical perspective to the older kids and then focus on, that personal for the younger? Like how would you want that delivered for different ages?
When I wrote Finding Pop, I really wanted it to be a universal story, because it's still happening today. Immigration, families looking for a better home. So I purposely, outside of the jacket flap, you really don't know where they're from. You don't really know where they're coming from. They know at the very end they're going to America, to the US, but I just wanted to show that this could happen anywhere at any time to any family, and it's still happening today. So I think from like a parent standpoint, and depending on the age, I think you hit the nail on the head. There are different themes throughout the book that different children of different ages can relate to. Like the younger one may seem, Maya's missing her papa. The end goal of Papa was to reunite with her dad. She wants to find her papa, and she knows the trip is dangerous, but really she doesn't really know why and what's going on. Besides, Papa left to find a better home. I want to go see Papa. So from that standpoint, I really wanted to focus on the child's innocent point of view, and she uses this game to help her process, like the chomp chomp, to process each step of the way. So in that sense, for younger children, finding a happy ending, family being together, being hopeful, like I really wanted that to shine through. For the older ages, and I've gone to school readings where I was reading to 5th and 6th graders. I think in that sense, the teacher wanted to be a part of like their history lesson. As they're learning about different cultures and how people come to the US and just different topics as part of their curriculum, they could incorporate this story to share a period in time where the boat people happened, where due to war and political reasons, these are the reason why these people left the country. So I think there's just different layers, and it depends on what you're wanting to highlight within the book. It's amazing to hear you say, what Phoebe picked up and then what Chloe picked up. Both of those things are really incorporated in the book. It's a matter of, I guess, how deep you want to dig into the story. So very perceptive, Chloe.
Well, and just, Phoebe also likes the chomp chomp. We do that now too.
Yeah.
She thinks that's really fun.
When we talk about immigration and journeys, like that is so scary. And I didn't want it to be, for a children's book, to be scary and sad. I think from the illustrations, someone can look at her journey and say, yes, like I can imagine how dangerous that would be. But what I really wanted to shine is the theme of love and courage, bravery, and just finding each other and hope and leveraging your community to help you get there. like, the Red Cross. So those are kind of the themes I wanted to really illustrate with the book, because it's a children's book. And, I think we know the reality of things, but there's also the beauty and hardship. And I wanted that to shine through.
And you just mentioned the word illustrate, and my next question has to do with the beautiful illustrations. Mm-hmm. So they show a significant amount of time passing. In the early drawings, she looks, I don't know, maybe 18 months old, 2 years old, 3 years old. You can kind of, because it's a nice soft illustration, you can sort of see whatever phase of a toddler you want. And then by the end, she looks like she could be maybe as old as a kindergartner. So were these kinds of prolonged separations common? And were there effects of that, or like, what was the role of that for you in telling the story?
Yeah, you're right. So in real life, when Papa left, so I was 1, I wasn't reunited again with my dad until I was 3. So 2 years had passed. When families leave separately, that is common, right? Because you hope that you end up in the same place, but that isn't always the case. So people can leave the country from the same place and end up in America. We have family in Australia. We have family in Germany. We know people, family and friends in Canada. And so we just get totally dispersed. We were very lucky to have found each other. I think it's a blessing, maybe some luck, but really, I think that time frame where you're apart, I think that's common. Unless you're traveling together, I think there could be years before you get reunited with your family. And you asked about the impact, because I hadn't seen my dad in a couple of years, and because he did grow a mustache and he did change. And, back in the early 80s, the way people dressed, and his hair was long and he had, a mustache. When I saw him at the airport, I cried. My mom said I did not want him near me. I did not recognize him. I did not know who this man with this freaky mustache. And I would not let him come near me or my mom. And so my dad, like every great dad, he bribed me with candy and toys. And after a couple of weeks, I'm like, okay, this man isn't so bad, giving me all these toys and treats. And so, I came to accept him. But it's funny because there are pictures, like old pictures that we found a couple of months ago in this old stash in the house, where there are pictures of him holding me. And literally, I am going like this, like totally shying away from my dad with this like disgusted look on my face, like, who are you? And why are you touching me? So it took a little bit of time for me to adjust to Papa, even though I wanted to find Papa, but I didn't know what Papa looked like.
Oh, well, it sounds like you had the right approach to win you over, just patience and toys and candy.
Exactly. Exactly.
So this story is about how one family made it to America. And then when I finished reading it, what I thought is, well, what happens next? Like, do they thrive? Do they struggle? Like you said, do they end up split up all around the world from friends and family? And how do they navigate that? Is there any chance you might write about that in the future?
Yeah, Tiffany, that's a great question. Maybe I should pose that to my editor and have a sequel. So thank you.
I'll give it a thumbs up.
Yeah, thank you. No plans to write a sequel, but I think to your question, I think it's hard. I mean, my parents had to rely on the kindness of others. We had church groups helping us. My dad is such a hard worker. Both my parents, hard workers, had multiple jobs, doing day shift and night shift and switching off with each other so they could, make sure we were okay. They had to learn English. Didn't have a lot of money. My parents didn't have a lot of schooling back in Vietnam because they were so poor. And so they had to help out in the family farm. And that's the only way we could make money. My dad finished high school, but my mom did not, because they didn't know English and they don't have a professional degree that could translate here to the US. They had to find jobs that they could do, like hourly jobs. Like my mom worked at a car manufacturing plant and standing at the assembly line as the frame came by, she would put carpet in. My dad worked for the airport catering business, the chicken plant, just various jobs. And all the while listening, trying to read the newspaper, trying to watch TV, listening to radio so that they could learn English and pick up on key terms and just important phrases that they needed to know to survive, to interact with others. It was hard. And I don't remember that necessarily. I do remember differences in what I had as a child compared to the other children in my school, their lunches and the snacks that their parents packed them. Like I could tell a difference, but I didn't know why. I didn't know that we were poor because I think my parents were so loving and gave us all that they could. I never felt like I was missing out on anything. And it wasn't until I was older where I had enough perception to look back and say, okay, I see that now. And now I know why, I didn't have snacks in school, but other children did because their parents packed it for them. And, little things. And that's why I knew, we grew up with a lot less because my parents were working hard, multiple jobs. But I was very thankful. I wouldn't change a thing because I always felt loved. It never felt like I was missing out on anything growing up.
I think just about any kid in the world would rather have parents who love them than a bunch of money.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think it really taught us growing up the value of money, the value of hard work. Mm-hmm. My parents don't complain a lot. They know what they need to do to take care of their family and they just do it. They know it's hard. They know it can be frustrating, but they just do it with love, without a lot of complaining. And I think sometimes I feel like our generation today, I think that's qualities that sometimes we don't have. And even within myself, sometimes I have to remind myself that, hey, my parents went through a lot worse and they're successful today. And so whatever hardship I'm going through, I have the means, I know the language, I have the education to accomplish my goals. I think it really helps ground me when I think about complaining.
What are you currently working on and where can listeners find you online?
I just finished working on a story. It's called Another Word for Neighbor. It's about, have you seen the movie Up?
Yes, I love it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So it's one of my favorites. This third story is similar to Up, where it's a grumpy old man and two neighborhood kids move in. Their names are Kate and Ollie, and they move in next door. They're super annoying to him because he's super grumpy, but eventually they get to him and this grumpy old man, these two young kids develop a very loving relationship with each other. So similar to Up where, it starts off pretty rough between the man and the kids, and then it gets to be, a wonderful relationship for the neighbors and like also an intergenerational bond. Sometimes you don't think about little kids and senior folks having a lot in common or developing relationships like that outside of like maybe grandparents. So I wanted to showcase that that's not necessarily true. And I think a lot of beautiful relationships between our younger generation and the older ones.
Have you got a website or social media that we can plug?
AngelaKrans.com has my book information, a little bit about myself and my writing process. You can also find me on Instagram at angela.pham.krans. On my website, you can also send me an email. I love hearing from readers. I've had moms reach out to tell me their experience with reading the book with their child. And it's like one of my favorites. Seeing children hold your book is just a feeling I can't describe. And then hearing feedback from parents and what they love about it and how they've used it to start discussions with their children is amazing. And it really validates, why I love writing for children and why I do it. It's the best part for me.
I hope you keep doing it because this really is a special book. I get a lot I think a lot about how to include more modern authors on the show. And I've been kind of looking for just what I really think are the books that are going to stick around in the future. And I really do think this one will. It's just such a special little book. And there's so much love on every page. So it was a real privilege to notice it and get the chance to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, thanks, Tiffany. I loved all your questions. I think they were I haven't really been asked these questions before in previous interviews with other folks from the writing community. So I really appreciate the chance to share new and different information during this interview. And of course, having Chloe is such a pleasure. And Chloe, I'm so glad you love the book. And I guess before you go, could I ask you a question, Chloe?
Yeah.
What was your favorite part of Finding Papa?
All of it.
All of it. Oh, you're so sweet. Wish I could give you a hug right now. Here's
virtual hugs.
Air hug.
Air hug.
Thank you. That means a lot. Okay. I really appreciate that.
Well, thanks so much for joining us today. You've been listening to the Children's Literature Podcast. Please subscribe and give the show a rating. Send comments to letters@children'sliteraturepodcast.com. I'm your host, TQ Townsend. Thanks for listening.